Good evening, everybody. It's 6:30 and I'll read my opening statement. Commence the whole meeting with the Development Control Committee in virtual session. For the benefit of the members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I'd like to explain who everybody is. My name is Councillor Paul Miller and I'm the chairman of the committee. This committee meeting is being held virtually in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings, which reflect the published government regulations implementing the Coronavirus Act. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be available to view when the meeting is finished. Councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decision on the application before us tonight are identified by name on the screen. Ward councillors addressing the committee will be introduced by name. Ward councillors, can I ask that the officers who will be advising the committee to introduce themselves now and their role?
I'm Sue Tarvett, I'm the case officer and I'll be presenting the applications.
I'm Ruth Miller, I'm the Head of Planning, Sustainability and Infrastructure.
I'm Mike Townsend, I'm the Planning and Development Manager.
I'm Anne Greaves, the Legal Services Manager.
Bernadette, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be assessing the material brought before us and listening to the representations made, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. In reaching these decisions, we are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. I understand that planning decisions can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional and patient throughout this evening in case of any slight delay in presentations. Can I now remind both members and officers of the procedures that we'll be using as this meeting is virtual. Unless speaking, officers will have their videos switched off to provide clarity as to who the committee members are for those watching and participating. At this point, can I ask all officers present to switch off their video? The officers present will only switch their video link on during the item that they are presenting or when they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. For the virtual meeting, councillors should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Member Code of Conduct and ensure they are not disturbed during the meeting. Can members ensure that their mobile phones are now switched off or on silent? Can members of the committee turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they've been invited to speak by me? Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote on the item under discussion. Members can indicate their wish to speak by raising their hand and should only speak when I as chair invite them to do so. When we move into debate of the application, may I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep any comments on each agenda item to a maximum of 4 minutes. As chair, I will confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda before they address the committee by audio link. Councillors should state if there are any declarations of interest or if they have predetermined an item on the agenda that they are leaving the meeting and switch off their video link. Then they can switch on their video link and rejoin when I call the next agenda item. Where a member of the committee has a predetermined position on an application and is registered to speak under the public speaking scheme, they will stand down from the meeting, will only be able to participate as a visiting councillor by audio link. They will then rejoin the meeting as a member of the committee once that application has been determined. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting by audio link in the order set out in the update paper, but I reserve the right to reorder the speaking in the event that technical difficulties occur. I will ask each speaker to confirm their name and interest in the item before commencing their contribution. I would ask that points made by visiting speakers are material planning considerations relating to facts. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to keep points made on the application to material reasons only. Any questions from members of the committee to speakers should be related to matters of fact related to the application and not opinion. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning is finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. Voting will be taken by roll call, and I will confirm the recommendation that is to be voted upon before the voting begins. Each member unmutes their microphone to vote, and they can leave a small pause before speaking to allow their vote to be heard. Can each member then indicate whether they are for or against the recommendation, or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully, we'll not have any IT problems, but can I remind councillors that if their connection is lost, they should immediately advise the Democratic Support Officer and use their meeting link to access the meeting again. And in case that happens, does everybody have the contact number for Ellie, who is, I believe, the Democratic Service Officer tonight? Councillor Robinson.
I don't, Paul. If you've got it, that would be really helpful.
Well, if I call Bernadette, please, could you just announce the telephone number for anybody with difficulties, Bernie? Hello, Bernadette.
Yeah, sorry, won't be 1 sec, Councillor. It's 845 682.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, we will move on to the main agenda. And apologies for absence and substitution. I have one notification this evening, and Councillor Harvey is substituted for Councillor Potter. I don't believe there are any other adjustments to that. Now I come along to declarations of interest. Do you have any declarations of interest? Councillor McCormack.
Craving your indulgence, Chair, I have a prepared statement for the monitoring officer that I would like to read out to the committee. I intend to stay. Statement begins as follows. Members will be aware I have commented in public and have been quoted in the press regarding Basingstoke Town Community Football Club, including meetings of full council, scrutiny committee and community environment and partnerships committee. Given I have made such comments, I have been open with the chair and other members of the committee and have given careful consideration with advice from officers as to whether there is any reason why I should not participate in this evening's meeting. I am very aware of my responsibilities on this committee and that decisions need to be taken in accordance with planning policy and the law. I do have views about the football club and its long-term future, but as far as these planning applications are concerned, I do have an open mind and look forward to hearing the representations by all those participating in the meeting before reaching a final decision. On this basis, I do not consider that my previous comments preclude me from attending, and I have therefore concluded that I can take part in this meeting and vote at the end of each item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Frankham.
Yes, I also had to take legal advice. There's no crossover between the borough and county on this application, as quoted in the papers on page 33. It could also be considered that through the redevelopment of the site, there would be beneficial through the provision of land necessary for the Brighton Hill roundabout, the HCC proposals, criteria H. Whilst the access proposals for this site are compatible with the overall Brighton Hill roundabout proposals, the implementation of the roundabout scheme is not within the control of the applicant and may not come forward as a result of any decision on this planning application. For this reason, it is not considered that this has particular weight in the decision on this planning application. And on page 45, the county roundabout improvement scheme is only related to the current proposals. in that the access road to the site, which is under consideration at this outline stage, also forms part of the proposed link road that would run through the site connecting up to Western Way. This link road is not for consideration as part of the application. It's only the section of the access way into the site which provides access to the residential proposals for which there is considerations. These are repeated on page 76 and 89 respectively. And I declare exactly the same as Councillor McCormick, that I conclude that I can continue with the meeting and attend and vote. And I've also had legal advice that that is correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Frankham. Nobody else? Fine. There are no urgent matters, and the minutes of the Development Control meeting held on the 9th of September will be brought before this committee on the 7th of October, which is the next regular DC meeting. Now, we're going into the application. What I'm going to do is just make a mention of two things. One, that we're not, it's a question of what we're not here to consider tonight. Just to make it clear, we're not here to consider property matters, as in, for example, for the gifting of land, whether it is council or private ownership. Now, we'll introduce the first item, and I'm going to call, and this is my discretion, there's a slight change in the public speaking this evening. I'm going to call 4 individuals, and the reason and the time allotted I've increased to 5 minutes. This is because of confusion of the registration of some of the, there was what I will say that there was a bit of a conflict of understanding about the registration. So I've used my discretion to allow a bit more time for them. So it's Mr. French, Mr. Stoker, Mr. Miller, and Mr. Williams. Now, if they can come online and just wait a minute, I will get the officer, Sue Tarvitt, to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just share the screen with you so we can have the plans up. Thank you, Chair. This is an outline application for the erection of up to 85 dwellings, as outlined on page 15 of the agenda, and with associated access and external works, following the demolition of the existing football stand and terraces within the red line, as shown on the plan before you. The only detail for consideration at this stage is the access. It should be noted that the access is the same as that proposed under the care home application, which is shown as the blue land on the plan in front of you, and that is for discussion later on in the agenda. The access part also forms part of the link road, which was approved by Hampshire County Council in July of this year under their Regulation 3 approval, which also covers the Brighton Hill roundabout road improvements. The proposed access arrangements, which are before you now, take access from Winchester Road and would involve the minor relocation of an existing bus stop and lay-by. The access would be signalised, allowing a right-hand turn from the site across on Winchester Road South and left-hand turn towards the north. There would be no right turn access onto the site, into the site from the southern side of Winchester Road. Illustrative plans have been submitted with the application, which show a series of 5 blocks across the site with varying heights. The blocks fronting onto Winchester Road frontage would be 4 stories in height, and those to the rear would be 3, stepping down to 2 story to the rear of the site. The proposals are recommended for approval, subject to the completion of a legal agreement and securing various elements as outlined on page 15 of the report. I would make particular reference to the works required to satisfy policy CN8 of the local plan, and the agreement will secure the following: improvements at Winklebury Hants FA to bring the stadium up to category C, including the provision of a clubhouse and the provision of a bond. The improvements will be implemented prior to the commencement on the application site at Camrose and will then be required to be completed within 6 months. The agreement will also secure a contribution towards 2 artificial training pitches and contributions towards grass playing field provision. Sport England have also confirmed that by securing these measures through a legal agreement, it will secure the provision of a category C ground. Sport England have stated that these works provide equivalence with the ground grading at Camrose, and as such raise no objection. If I can draw your attention to the update paper. So there is a change in the recommendation in relation to the affordable housing. Basically, each site will now provide its own affordable housing requirement. All other parts of the recommendation at the beginning of the officer's report remain unchanged. There are some minor changes to the wording of some of the conditions as listed on the update, and they allow for the demolition and highway works to be excluded. Members are reminded that the Section 106 agreement will still require that no works, including demolition and highways works, take place until the improvements at Winklebury have commenced, and that these works then have to be completed within 6 months. The applicant's agent has confirmed acceptance of the pre-development conditions listed on the update paper, and the officer's recommendation is for approval.
Right, thank you, Sue. If we could drop the shared screen.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, our public speakers, Mrs. French, Stoker, Miller and Williams, you have 5 minutes between you. Can I assume that you've sorted out how you're going to be speaking within those 5 minutes?
This is Steve Williams speaking. We've tried to sort it out as far as possible, but I haven't been able to speak to Mr. Jack Miller. So our proposal is that Martin French speaks only on the care home.
Mr. Williams, you're breaking up. I got about half of that.
I'm okay. I'm terribly sorry. I'll speak slowly. Our proposal, I lead on residential homes, that Colin Stoker follows, and then Jack Miller comes in to make his points. I haven't been, although I've tried now.
Mr. Williams, I gather that the three of you there, you're breaking up, whether it's your bandwidth, I don't know how you're communicating. We will try this. You've got a total of 5 minutes between 4 people. How you break it up, and I will advise you when you have 1 minute to go. Who wishes to start?
Chairman, it's Colin Stoker speaking.
Yes.
Steve is in a difficult location, I believe, for internet connection and such like. He is aware of that, and clearly you can hear that he's breaking up and losing connection.
Mm-hmm.
With your permission, sir, could I please give his rendition to you and then follow up, the idea being that I will do Steve Williams and myself and then hand over.
Absolutely fine. So I say again, you have 5 minutes between you. So I understand you're addressing Steve's as well. Then presumably after that, it's Jack Miller, followed by Martin French.
Yes, is that Martin? I don't know if Martin's online now or can hear me, but I believe that's the case. And Steve and I were going to come in first and Martin follow on.
Fine. Well, off you go. And I'm setting the timer now.
Okay. Following planning officer report, is now clear that serious flaw in the mitigations approach means that the applications cannot be determined without urgent remedial action. The planning officer states the key issue is whether the replacement facilities at the Winkelbury site equivalent or better in terms of quality, quantity and accessibility as the existing facility. This means Winkelbury must be FA Ground C in the name of the Camrose, in the same as Camrose. Those mandatory FA requirements specify that as well as present spectator capacity of 1950, there must be a potential capacity of 3,000. Winkelbury planning approval only scraped in at the 1950 level. Winkelbury is a small site with a very narrow footprint, constrained on all four sides from expansion by geography, trees, and permanent structures. The location cannot conceivably meet a 3,000 requirement. To retain public confidence in the planning process, this sensitive matter must be urgently investigated and brought back. Many objectors said Winkelbury was too small and inappropriate. There is no evidence that the planning officer investigated the matter. This mandatory requirement must be avoided, wished away, or attributed to others. It needs to be addressed. That's Steve Williams's section. I'm going to carry on now. I do not agree that the planning officer has embraced the National Planning Policy Framework for Mitigation. Clause 97B clearly states that the loss resulting from the proposed development will be replaced by equivalent or better provision in terms of quantity and quality in a suitable location. Sport England add to that better accessibility and management arrangements. Winkelbury can only be a temporary emergency lifeline because it's half the area of the Camrose. The clubhouse is only 39% of the size of that at the Camrose. Minimal covered stands and step terracing compared to Camrose. Inability to host cut ties and magnitude catered for safely at the Camrose. One turnstile access point. The Camrose has 4 turnstile entrances allowing rapid ingress and egress for spectators. No facilities to segregated supporters. The Camrose entrances, stands and terracing allow home and away supporters to be segregated. Winkelbury is oversubscribed and cannot cater for the club's development teams as well as imposing new heavy cost burdens. It does not allow unfettered management enjoyed by the Camrose, which is pivotal for progress. As a community, it reduces aspiration. Progress is capped only to one further promotion at FA grade C level before grade B is needed, but impossible to achieve at Winkelbury. In 2016, the club were playing at the level which would require a grade B facility, so they're not very far away from requiring a capacity of over 4,000 people plus another 1,000. Finally, if this planning officer recommendation is adopted, the outcome will be perverse and hugely detrimental to the community, meaning a major spectator-oriented football ground will be lost to the large footballing community. The council Horizon 2050 promises will be compromised in the face of increasing population and demand. The applicant will not be required to fund a brand new replacement facility to the club. Instead, the applicant is to benefit hugely from the £1 million plus invested in Winkelbury by football authorities, the council and the community football club. The applicant is effectively getting off almost scot-free from what should be a significant mitigation cost. The applicant will have no liability for the crippling debt forced on the football club just to survive at Winkelbury. If adopted, the recommendation will signal a huge green light to property developers targeting community facilities.
You have 1 minute left between you.
One, go. Who's going next?
Yes, so this is Jack Miller. I object because despite ignoring the legal covenant on the land, despite ignoring local plan policy, as I've got not very long, I'd like to just go into that. So this is also paragraph 97 of the government's national planning policy framework, which is also echoed in Basingstoke Council's local policy plan. Point G of that says that any proposed replacement or improved facilities will be equivalent or better in terms of quality, quantity and accessibility, and there'll be no overall reduction in the level of facilities. And I want to know whether there has been an assessment which has been undertaken, namely the Camrose, and there is indeed surplus to requirements.
Right, Mr. French, if you want to wind up very quickly, your time is just about up, but I will give you a chance to make a brief statement. Mr. French? I'm sorry, Mr. French, but if you're not there, I have to continue with the meeting. I have to continue with this, and I'm going to move on to the next speaker, who is Mr. McPhail. Mr. McPhail?
Good evening.
Good evening. Mr. McPhail, as I use my discretion with the public speakers, for 5 minutes, I'm being fair and I'm giving you 5 minutes as well. And the time starts now.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mark McPhail.
Excuse me, Mr. McPhail. I just sort of stop you there. Yes, Mike.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair. There would normally be questions from members to speakers in the first instance before we move on to the second speaker, Chair.
Thank you very much for that reminder. If we could have the other speakers back, please. And Mr. McPhail, I apologise for that.
No problem.
Right. Mr. Stoker, Jack Miller, and Mr. French, my apologies for that. If you just stay on the line, I'll ask members questions to the speakers. I'll start with Councillor Robinson, followed by Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Question to the speaker is, could you tell us what spare capacity there is at Winklebury in terms of pitch time availability? Is the facility fully used, overused, underused? Yeah, is there the capacity to put more games on at the Winklebury facility? Thank you.
May I answer that, Mr. Chairman? Colin Stoker.
Please answer the question. Yes.
As I understand it, Mr. Robinson, the situation at Winklebury is very highly populated and used by the community. The football club itself will have very little time and will not have full access or anything like that for at the Winklebury pitch. It will have to succeed to every booking that the FA has taken and will be continuing to take. This will mean the flexibility to use the pitch at Winklebury is completely lost, unlike the use of the cameras, which is full access of the football club.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. The first one is, what size ground does Basingstoke Town Football Club need as of now? That is, does it need a grade C ground? And the second question is that the two artificial pitches that will be lost, did Basingstoke Town Football Club use those for training?
Martin French, are you there? Looks like I'm on my own, Chairman.
Hello, it's Jack Miller. I can also answer that. Sorry, Councillor Bound, could you just repeat the first question, please?
Certainly. What size ground does Basingstoke Town Football Club need as of now? Not what the aspiration is, but what is it as of now?
Absolutely. In the current stand of Basingstoke, as I understand it, would need grade C. That would be at a stadium where the football club would have free reign, if you like, as there's a first team, several youth teams, disability, women's, girls teams. They would have full use of the stadium. I think that's the main point. They would have full use of the stadium, whereas Winklebury, Basingstoke would be, if you like, tenants and would have to book the pitches as all the other clubs who play at Winklebury would also have to do. Could you just repeat the second question as well, please, Councillor Bound?
The two artificial pitches which were at the Camrose, which will be lost, were they used exclusively by Basingstoke Town Football Club?
No, I can confirm they were used by Basingstoke Town Football Club for training. Especially in the winter months, those were used for training. So that would have to be additional training at Winklebury, which I'm not sure whether the club would have exclusivity of at all. And indeed, that was booked out to members of the public, including myself. and there's nowhere for my team to play now. No current bookings as that's been removed and not been replaced.
Thank you. Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I just want confirmation that was it 5 seasons ago Basingstoke played at Conference South at the Camrose, and it was in fact a level B requirement for Conference South when they were playing at the Camrose.
In 2016, yes.
Thank you.
And they're not far away from needing it. In terms of 2 promotions, they will need a grade B pitch.
Councillor Harvey.
Can I just pick up on Andy's question and just explore that a little bit? Are you saying that the Camrose ground, as it is currently or was in the context of the way it should have been left and is in the sense the ground now we're talking about, at grade B status, it was grade B status and would have been at grade B status if that was required and needed? As
I'm sorry, again, I'll interject. I'm sorry if anybody else wants to speak, but I believe the situation is that as probably people are aware, the Camrose ground has degraded somewhat over the last few years. It has sufficient space and capacity to be grade B, and it reached that point at one stage, although it's only grade C, or that's by choice more than anything else, in my opinion. If the club was promoted while still at the Camrose, there is no way that we wouldn't be graded to grade B, and the work would be done either by basically the goodwill of the supporters.
So would it be reasonable to say that the Camrose ground, like for like, could be argued to require grade B status rather than simply grade C status? That could be an argument that's advanced.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. If I can just say that, in my opinion, I mean, I used to be manager of the football club and relatively, I used to play for the club. It is a large area. It has plenty of access, has plenty of opportunity to put stands and terracing, step terracing. It is eminently expandable, probably beyond stage B. But as I said in my statement, I doubt very much whether Winkelbury would ever have the chance to be at that level.
No, sorry, just to add to that, it's Jack Miller again. Just to say, yes, there was the level that Basingstoke was at ground B. This is from my understanding, and that would include. Yes, so I don't think Winkelbury could get to that. That hasn't been explored to get to the same standard as I referred to in my words. It should be of equivalent. Yeah, and things like the clubhouse hasn't been taken into consideration, where a lot of money was made from the football club. The pitches, the mobile phone masts, the lockers, the car wash, the bookies. Basingstoke would not be able to have that money, which it would have made previously at the Camrose, so at Winkelbury. So in that state, it is not of equivalent standard.
Agreed.
Okay, Councillor Howard. Yeah, Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Mr. Stoker, if I may. Mr. Stoker, you mentioned the fact that there's a requirement if the ground is going to be played C for up to 3,000 spectators to be there, rather than the 1,950, which you consider as the maximum that could be provided at Winkelbury. Could you just expand on that, please, and exactly where you feel that requirement is coming from, and put some flesh on the bones there, please?
I most certainly will. I have in front of me the National Ground Grading Category C documentation from the Football Association, and under 1.3, capacity. The stadium must have a minimum capacity of 1,950, calculated by a competent person in accordance with the guidance given in the Guide to Safety at Sports Ground, Green Guide. There must also be a potential to increase the capacity to 3,000 in the future. NB, the minimum capacity at grade B is 3,000. I mentioned the fact that during the calculation for planning permission for Winklebury, it was very difficult, I understand from Mr. Williams, who I'm really speaking on behalf of him, if you know what I mean, to actually get to 1950. They scraped in. He and I do not believe, looking at the plans of Winklebury Football Complex and the boundary that exists there on the drawings, that it's feasible to put very many more people in there at all. Certainly not another 1,050 people.
Okay.
And therefore, what a category C ground will not be granted. Oh, I believe, I don't know, it's up to the FA when they do the inspection, but the words they say is there must be a potential to increase the capacity to 3,000. So that's another 1,050 people. And at the moment, we envisage that the people standing around the pitch will be 3 deep on one level, just flat against railings, 3 deep. And that, to me, is an appalling situation for football supporters to have to withstand. There should be terraces all the way around, like there is at the Camrose.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Right, gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm now going to move on. There are no more questions for you. And I'm going to call Mr. McPhail, please.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. McPhail. Sorry about the false start previously. As I said, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Malcolm McPhail, Director in Basron, the freehold owner of part of the Camrose site, subject to the planning application this evening. I've been involved with Basingstoke Town Football Club for the last 15 years. Just to clarify the point made by one of the last speakers, it is grade C, it has never been grade B. I don't want to dwell too much on the past history, but it's just worth briefly recapping for the benefit of members elected since 2016. We've been involved in discussions with the council over the last 12 years re a suitable replacement site for the football club. The Camrose was not fit for purpose, has become obsolete and requires major capital expenditure to bring it up to the required league standards. After an exhaustive search for the council, we were offered 3 potential relocation sites. Eventually, the old common site was selected and approved as a suitable option by the Cabinet in 2014, subject to undertaking full public consultation. Following objections from local action groups, the Cabinet and Council overturned their original approval on the 26th of January 2016 and confirmed there was no suitable replacement sites in the borough to relocate the club to. On the 30th of June 2016, Basron purchased their freehold interest in the Camrose site, subject to an existing lease to the football club. Just to clarify, there is no restrictive covenant on the land registry freehold title. That is quite clearly evident if you actually want to download the land registry title. Basron also purchased the land from the trustees of Camrose Estates, subject to the existing commercial lease to the club. They paid at that time full commercial open market value, as can again be evidenced with the land registry title. The land was never gifted to the club by Lower Camrose, which is a popular misconception. The football club ceased playing football at the Camrose at the end of 2018-2019 season. We were given 18 months clear advance notice. Basingstoke Town and Basron then negotiated a ground sharing arrangement with Winchester City Council, and the community club was kept fully informed of the process. We started in early May 2019 and was approved by the Southern League on the 19th of June. The football licence was then transferred from Basingstoke Town Limited to the new community club. Winchester was always deemed a short-term solution, whilst the community club negotiated a formal lease with Hampshire FA and obtained planning permission for the enhancement works to bring Winklebury up to a grade C level. The negotiations were lengthy and were only finalised in October, November 2019. As a result, the planning application was only submitted and registered on the 26th of November. This delay, unfortunately, was down to the Community Club and Hampshire FA not reaching agreement in relation to the scope of works. The planning application for the residential site was lodged in April 2019 with the plan that the Winkelbury planning application would then follow shortly thereafter. The initial intent was to obtain planning permission for both the residential and the enhancement works at the same time, with the intent of carrying out the works at Winkelbury in the autumn of 2019. This would minimise the time the club had to play away from Winchester. Basingstoke prepared funding the Winkelbury enhancement works planning application, and it was approved in January, February 2020. From the planning application under consideration tonight, the following significant benefits will flow. We'll create a much needed new sustainable homes development for the borough in full compliance with the current local plan policy. I will also assist the council in achieving their 5-year land supply. We'll generate 40% affordable housing for local people. We'll provide much needed 70-bed care facility. We'll deliver the route for the new Hampshire County Council approved relief road. We've secured by a 106 agreement and bond. We will fund the improvements up to grade C at Winkelbury, including a new clubhouse and increasing the capacity up to 1950.
You have 1 minute, Mr. McPhail.
Which we will secure by the club's long-term future and possible movement up to league tables. There's also the future potential at Winkelbury to increase the capacity up to 3,000. We have produced plans showing that it's actually quite easily achievable by introducing additional terracing on the east, west and northern boundaries of the site. We'll fund 2 new AstroTurf playing facilities and there'll be also other significant 106 benefits. The redevelopment proposals will not be undertaken until the enhancement works are implemented at Winkelbury. Your officer report contains in detail the full policy compliance of the application, and no objections have been received from consultees, including Sports England and Hampshire FA. As a result, in conclusion, we would ask the members to ratify the officer's recommendation, approve the planning application tonight, subject to entering into a Section 106 agreement to secure the aforementioned benefits. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McPhail, and thank you for keeping to time. I appreciate that. Members, questions for the applicant? Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the point made about expanding Winkelbury to, quote, easily accommodate, unquote, 3,000 people by expanding the terracing on the east, north and south sides.
Yes.
So I would have to declare a local interest. I live half a mile away from this Winkelbury site. On the east side, you've got trees and you've got the ring road, steep cutting into the ring road. On the north side, you've got the car park. On the south side, you've got a footpath, a bit of a gap, then a footpath and the railway. So realistically, how are you going to do that when you might, this construction work might entail removing several dozen trees, possibly doing remedial work to the embankment of the ring road, possibly interfering with a footpath and the railway, and possibly interfering with the car park when the car park spaces are at a premium on that site anyway. So I see that as an assertion, but honestly can't see how achievable that is, and we haven't had the benefit of a site viewing to see exactly where it would go, or even any drawings as to how that might be achieved.
Do you want me to respond?
Yes, please, Mr. River.
Thank you. We have produced two layouts. One, we're not extending the boundary on one particular layout. We're not extending the boundary of the Winkelbury facility. We're providing additional terracing adjacent to the new grandstand on the northern boundary. We're providing additional terracing adjacent to the grandstand on the southern boundary, and also providing terracing immediately in front of the clubhouse facility on the western boundary. We can achieve 3,000 by doing that. We can also, if need be, increase that by actually moving the eastern boundary and incorporating potential terracing there. That may include the possibility of removing the trees. That's one option. It's not essential, but it is one option that we could proceed. So there are 2 options that we actually have looked at, both of which will satisfy the grading that's required under grade C.
Okay, Councillor McCormick.
I'll let someone else ask questions now, Chair.
I have nobody else. Councillor Goodison, followed by Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. McPhail. Could I just ask you, you're no doubt aware that in the original 1950 exchange and document signed by Count Camrose, he did impose some covenants. You obviously feel these covenants are no longer enforceable. Could you perhaps explain why you feel they're no longer enforceable?
In 1952 or 53, a commercial ground lease was granted to the club at that point in time. There was lease covenants that were incorporated in the lease itself, but there was no covenant actually imposed on the land. On the land registry freehold title, the land is free of any covenants. The covenants within the lease are between Basingstoke Town Limited and the new owner, which is Bergeron Developments, and they can be varied, agreed, amended, discharged as we like between the two parties. There is no covenant restricting the use on the site on the freehold title. That's evidenced by the land registry extract. We also had discussions with the legal department at Basingstoke and Borough Council on this topic many months ago as well, and they have confirmed that is the case.
Okay, Councillor.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McPhail, on page 36 of our report, we've got a breakdown of the affordable housing and the proposals
yes,
for the market housing in the development. In the proposal, you're indicating 13 affordable units will be two-bedroomed apartments. Given that these affordable units will be on upper floors in flatted blocks, could you confirm to me whether it's your intention or not to have a lift access to those, or will they be reliant on staircases?
There will be lift access. I think if I can just perhaps remind you, it's a reserve. That's an outline application with access only. Reserve matters will deal with the actual detail of the scheme itself. But bearing in mind the story level of the apartment block, we'd anticipate there'll be lifts in the apartments.
Well, it's fine. It's just I want it on record that you're committing to the affordable housing in there in principle, because it is the principle we're talking about. Each of those affordable units will have lift access to them.
Well, it will be covered in the Section 106 agreement. We will enter into a Section 106 obligation, which will require us to provide 40% affordable housing, of which 70% will be social rented, 30% will be intermediate housing, and we'll have to obviously, the council will retain nomination rights under the Section 106, and an RP will be involved in due course as well. So I said, but the actual detailed design of that, we will not develop. We will not develop the site. The site will be developed by a residential developer. We'll have to for full compliance with the 106 and satisfy the council's obligations contained therein.
Forgive me. Are you suggesting that you will sell the site to a private developer who will then bring forward the reserve matters? Forgive me. Is that what you're saying?
We will sell the site with the benefit of outline planning consent to a residential developer, and they will then implement the scheme and proceed to submit reserve matters submissions.
Thank you very much, Mr. McPhail. I have no more questions from the councillors. Councillor Bound.
Sorry, just a quick one, Mr. McPhail. What is the size of the playing area at the Camrose, please?
The size of the playing area, the overall site is it's about 6.5 acres in total, of which we, Bergeron, own 4.5 acres, and the council owns 1.9 acres.
Sorry, I wondered whether you knew the actual dimensions of the playing field.
Of the pitch, I'm not familiar with the pitch. It's league standard compliance, so I'm not really familiar what the actual dimensions of the pitch are. But the pitch at Winkelbury is of a similar standard, a similar size.
Councillor Harvey, did you have a supplemental?
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me. Yes, I did. On page 39 of the report, we have the section regarding parks and open spaces and what that tells us. And I'd like to ask Mr. McPhail, in regard to the under provision of open green space on the site, we're talking about 2/3 roughly that is a shortfall set against the provision of 1/3 as the bare minimum. Why is that the case? Given that we're talking about families, we're talking about an environment in which we're looking for good quality development. In principle, why did you choose not to provide the standard that we're asking for, And may I ask, in regard to play provision, it says here that there will be no play provision. It's another off-site contribution. Why did you choose not to offer play provision as a part of this proposal? And do you accept that there is an under provision in Southam of play provision to begin with?
We had a lengthy negotiation with the planning officers, which lasted in total 18 months in relation to the detail of the application. The application changed. Again, I just stress it's an outline application with access only being determined this evening. The provision of the open space we felt was adequate for the site. We're also making a significant financial contribution to cover the shortfall, all of which will be covered in the Section 106 obligation. Play facilities may well be provided in due course on the site as part of the overall reserve matter submission in due course. But there is a provision under Section 106 to accept or to provide a financial contribution if they are not provided. So it's covered either way.
You do accept that we can only judge the application that's in front of us. We can't judge the reserve matters application because that's not in front of us. I have an application in front of me here that talks about 2/3 shortfall of open space, multi-games functional space area, and no play provision on site. That is the application that we have in front of us that we have to consider. And there is no identification of where that shortfall would be provided, merely an off-site contribution given. There is no identification of where a play area will be provided, only an off-site contribution made. Do you accept that those are issues that would need to be carefully considered?
I think that's a question really for your officers, Councillor Harvey. We had lengthy discussions with them. They took on board our position and they accepted the provision that's been provided on site, and they requested an off-site contribution, which we agreed in respect of both the open space and also in relation to the play facilities. It was discussed and negotiated with the officers.
And my final question, really, Chair, if I may, may I ask you, Mr. McPhail, why do you consider that the football ground as is surplus to requirements? Why is it that you're willing to spend the resources that you are choosing to on Winkleberry rather than on the Camrose? Why is it that the Camrose is surplus to requirements, please?
If you consider, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the Camrose is obsolete. The chairman of the club has funded the football club for over 20 years. Where would the funds and capital expenditure come from to actually carry out the actual improvements to the Camrose itself? The only value in the Camrose is in the land, and if you can't realise the value in the land, there's no money available to carry out any improvement works on the Camrose facility. We looked at the possibility of redeveloping the Camrose, retaining the football facility of the Camrose and redeveloping part of the site, but it just wasn't viable in terms of the financial numbers. So we looked at all the options. We did consider, as I mentioned again in my opening remarks, the possibility of relocating the club lock, stock and barrel. But that was 5 years ago. At that time, the club had aspirations of moving up 2 divisions. Unfortunately, the club has moved down 2 divisions in the interim. And as a result, their aspirations have changed. The ownership's changed. It's gone to a community club as well. So really, at the end of the day, to facilitate the works at Winkleberry, we need to achieve planning that then justifies our residual value in the land, which in turn enables us then to carry out all the Section 106 obligations.
Thank you.
Right, no more questions, councillors. Mr. McPhail, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I ask Councillor Gary Watts to check in, please? Councillor Watts, I see you're on board and you have 4 minutes. Councillor Watts?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Gary, yes.
All right, that's cool. Technology is brilliant.
You have 4 minutes.
I'm speaking against the outline application of 85 dwellings. I'll start on the consultation. The Borough Council carried out its consultation 18 months ago, and the results were 66 against and none in favour. So that's football in terms, that's 66-0. The applicant carried out its consultation 2.5 years ago, and it has changed in various guises over the period of time. And currently, many residents are not aware of the current proposals. So the Borough Council carried out consultation 18 months ago, and it had no residents in favour of the application, but it's ignoring its consultation, which is not a good show, is it? Going on to the paper, there's no waste strategy produced. The crime officer has serious concerns over blocks C and D. The landscape officer has concerns over the density, the lack of parking, and the lack of soft landscaping. And there's insufficient car parking in the current proposals. The minimum should be 106, and it is at 97. These are all officer reports. The experts, the officers, they all have misgivings about this current application. And I have grave concerns about all these matters going to reserve matters. I think they should have a full application in front of members now. Going on to the open space mitigation, it's already been stated that Southampton already has a deficit of the open space. And in the report, it keeps mentioning Grove. I mean, what the hell has Grove got to do with Southam? I do not know. I mean, what is the Black Dam ponds got to do with Southam? And there's talk about a relocation of a kickabout in Russell Howard. As members probably aware, Russell Howard is our biggest antisocial problem at the moment, apart from the Camrose at the moment, where it's been derelict and it's been overrun by youths at the moment, and the council don't seem to be taking any action against it, and leaving Basron, not forcing Basron to take any action against it. So moving a kickabout wall area to the Russell Howard playing fields without consultation with local residents would exacerbate the problems at Russell Howard. Going back to the council's policies, the council is going against its CN8 policy. It's more interested in meeting the government housing targets than protecting local facilities.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I'll stop now and I'll sum up my. No, I'll carry on. Thank you. Basingstoke Football Club are no longer playing at the Camrose due to the previous owner stopped them playing in 2019. And the council did not take any action to stop it when it owns 29% of the site, which it has decided to give that away to the Hampshire County Council to facilitate this development. This is contrary to the requirement of the policy of CN8. You should be protecting local assets like the football club, the social club, employment opportunities there as well. So it's going against its own policies.
If you could wind it up, please, Gary.
I'll let Councillor Regan come in. I'll add my second points to the next application. Thank you.
Right. Members, questions for Councillor Watts? Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Gary. Would you consider the Camrose ground, being the home of Basingstoke Town FC, to be a cultural heritage asset, an asset of value to Basingstoke?
Yes, I would. I've lived in Basingstoke for 43 years, and it's been part of my life since I've been here. I noticed in the paper, I think it's on page 38, we're talking about taking pictures for posterity. I find that really sad. You know, that I've got a bit emotional reading that section in the paper, and I'm not an avid Basingstoke supporter, and Basingstoke supporters reading that, you're going to take pictures of the stand before we knock them down and build 85 flats. I think it is a valid heritage site to Basingstoke in its history.
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey, could I just remind members, I did say in my opening, please don't ask speakers for their opinions. We're here to examine the facts related to this application. That's the only material issues that we have tonight. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Gary, I'm just thinking in terms of Russell Howard Park, I'd be right in saying, wouldn't I, that if that is the closest play area, you'd have to walk effectively from the Camrose across the Brighton Hill roundabout all the way down Pat Lane to access a play area or access open space. It is a significant distance away from this site. Is that reasonable? I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I? There's nothing else closer.
Well, there is one at Sandys Road, which is just up, but they're on about putting a kickabout up at Russell Howe, which is further. There's limited capacity at Sandys Road play area, and you know we're adding more play equipment, and you're taking away green fields, which we already have a deficit in Southam. So
I mean, there isn't anywhere I can think of, Gary, where you could create 6,000 square meters of new green space or multifunctional game space in Southam that would be new, not adding to something that already exists or amending something that already exists that would be brand new to the ward area, really.
That's correct, Councillor Harvey, yes.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Could I ask Councillor Reagan to check in, please? Good evening, Councillor.
You hear me now, Chair?
Yes, you're with us. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Off you go. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. I agree with everything, obviously, that Councillor Watts says about the application. I will, though Gary lived in the area for 43 years, I've lived in Southam 54 years. So not only have I been a councillor since 96 for Southam, on and off, but I've been a long-term resident. And one of the places is a state of houses with some flats. If you look at this development, you've got the 3 blocks of 4 stories, and then by the Winchester Road, then the blocks of 2 and 3 stories facing Mansfield Road. I mean, this is totally out of keeping with the area, totally unacceptable. When there have been planned applications before, it has to be in conjunction with the existing housing. This is nothing like existing housing, and also it seems to like a curse upon the area, because not only is the ground being left derelict, and as Gary said, we get constant antisocial reports of demolishing the place where Basron have ignored the building, but we would have preferred, and I noticed that Basron have totally disregarded it, that there'd been a major investment in the ground, and most of my constituents are not convinced that the covenant doesn't cover that. No doubt there are lots of legal arguments to say that it isn't, but certainly when I go down the West Side Community Centre, or the Labour Club, they turn around and say the covenant, Lord Camrose donated that to the community, and I like to see it continue as a community area, but to put blocks of flats there just to maximise the return, it's not in keeping with the area. And although the social housing is welcome, it could have been done with houses. If you're going to develop the area, it could have done with houses. All the flats is doing is to maximise their profit, and it's out of keeping with the area. But then we've got the link road as well, which runs right past the Mansfield Road. So not only have you got 2 blocks of flats overlooking Mansfield Road, you've also got a link road with 500 cars an hour, which will be going through the housing estate as well. So, you know, pretty horrendous place to live if it all goes ahead, especially 500 cars an hour going past the care home. That keep them awake at night. So to me, the area is totally a massive overdevelopment, which ignored the needs of the community and the football club and all football fans. And I used to go down in my younger days to. It's one of the coldest places to watch a game, if anybody knows it. Yeah, but it will be missed if it goes, and replaced by, which I can say is like like a Frankenstein development. It's dreadful. So I hope you all to reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, do we have any questions for Councillor Regan? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Colin, can I ask you about the parking in the area? The report says here that there'll be 85 dwellings providing 97 residential parking spaces, but there's going to be 41 units that are 2 bedrooms or greater. So my experience of such development has been that there is significantly more parking associated with 2 and 3 bed units than just 1 car, or the reality of what those units become. What would you describe as the parking impact locally on the roads around there if they have to force to be parking elsewhere than off-site? What sort of impact would this development, do you think, have on those surrounding roads?
Well, thank you, Councillor Harvey. It's a good question. Yes, any ward councillor knows in the older states that parking is top of our list of complaints from residents. And this, I mean, I have complaints about parking down the Mansfield Road now and Western Way. Well, Western Way, you might have noticed, it's all been churned up because people park on curbs and on the grass. So if they haven't got adequate parking area for the new flats, it's going to make the parking problem far worse than it is now. Thank you.
Okay. No more questions for Councillor Regan. Councillor Regan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Members, questions to officers? Tomlin, Bound, and Robinson. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I've got several, so I don't know how we want to play this. I got them in separate subjects. My first one is about the Section 106 agreement. So the question I have to the officer, page 30, there is in the middle of the page, there's a paragraph which outlines that by the end of this month, we should have completed getting Winklebury site up to category D. And then the football club could sort of come back and play. Now, I'm slightly confused here because I thought we had to have category C for them to be able to play. So that's my first question, is what's happening there. And secondly, then to make it category C, there is a planning application. I see some works, but the funding mechanism is therefore to be by approval of this application, which would mean we couldn't get category C in place quick enough for them to start playing. So that's that question. But related as well, there's also a comment on page 30 where Hants FA said that at the time of writing of this report, they hadn't actually bought into the 106 agreement. So I would like to understand the status of where they are. And then the final one is Sport England. I've read their letter, and my question is, are they fully familiar with the available hours that Hampshire Football Association have stated, or is it something they haven't considered? Thank you.
Thank you. If I go through the category D works, which are due to be finished at the end of September, that will allow the football club to stop having to share a site in Winchester, and it will allow them to at least play in Basingstoke. The category D works were the ones that have been funded by the council. The category C works, so planning permission exists for those. And Sport England, in consultation with Football Foundation, they've confirmed that the approvals at the Winklebury site bring the site up to category C, and they meet the FA grading requirements there. And there's a requirement in the Section 106 agreement that prior to any work starting at Camrose, the improvement works at Winklebury will be implemented. A bond will have to be in place as well, and that those works are then completed within 6 months of the start of those works. With regards to Sport England and the amount of usage time at Winklebury, I can't say whether I can't comment on whether Sport England were aware of that at the time when they made their comments. They haven't referred to them, so I can't say either way. And as far as I'm aware, Hants FA are signatories to the legal agreement in terms of, because they in terms of the lease arrangements as well, and their interest in the Winklebury land, Winklebury site.
Okay, thank you. Just if I may, Chair, just going back.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I don't quite understand here. We've heard from applicants and everybody that they have to have grade C, but the officer is telling me that they can come back and play in Basingstoke at grade D. Sorry, can you just confirm, well, is that correct, and who made that decision? Because it seems contrary to everything that we are hearing.
Sorry, the category C is a requirement of policy CN8 to basically provide equivalent facilities. So the existing Camrose ground is graded at category C. So the Winklebury improvements have to be a category C to be policy compliant in terms of policy CN8. I can't comment on what the grade the football ground is that they play in at Winchester at the moment. That might be of a lower grade. But what we're doing through the application is ensuring that it's policy compliant in terms of policy CN8, and that's basically that you have an equivalent facility. And bearing in mind the existing ground at Camrose is a grade C, the Winklebury improvements are required to be a grade C improvement.
Okay, and just there, sorry, Chair, just a clarification. The last part of that question was, and to get to grade C, it is subject to this planning application being granted, yes? The 106 agreement of this planning application.
You have a message from the dark side.
So the grade C permissions already exist and can be implemented at any time. But obviously, if you were to approve the scheme before you tonight, because you'll be losing a facility, then there is a requirement of the applicant before they start works at the Camrose site to implement the ground improvements at Winklebury. That's the connection.
Yeah, sorry. One last thing then, Chair, on just coming back on that. So just to clarify, if we are not able to give planning permission, that means the category C upgrade will not happen.
All I can say is that there's a permission to allow for the category C improvements. The funding for those will not be secured if permission isn't granted tonight, unless someone else were to fund.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Fine, you're welcome. And Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. We have before us tonight two applications, but on the off-site financial contributions, both applications feature 2 artificial grass pitches, grass playing field provision. If one application fails, does that mean that in effect they'll both fail because we can't provide the 2 artificial pitches because it's mentioned in both applications? I don't know whether that's clear, but are the 2 applications tied, in other words, to make it successful?
You need to look at both applications separately. Both applications have an impact on the Camrose ground. So if you were to implement, just for example, this application, there's a requirement to meet policy CN8 and to re-provide an equivalent facilities, and that's the category C improvements at Winklebury. The care home, which we're not discussing at the moment, that will come later, that equally impacts on the existing ground, and if you were to implement that one, or you were to allow that one, you would result in the loss of that ground. Therefore, through that application, that needs to re-provide for the improvements. The improvements are the bringing the ground to category C, the contributions towards the artificial training pitches, and the grass playing field. Both applications require that. If one is implemented before the other, then they will automatically have to provide those improvements and those contributions and the improvements at Winklebury. Once that's done, if the other application is dealt with at a late or is implemented at a later time, then those obligations fall away because they've already been met and you've met the policy requirement. I hope that explains it.
Yes, can I ask again, Chair? Can I ask another question?
Please go on.
Okay. Page 31 talks about contributions towards the loss of 2 artificial grass pitches and towards grass pitch provision. But where would this occur? It just says contributions to, and I don't know whether the contributions would cover, and presumably that would be very much dependent upon where, because they would, areas would have to be provided for in terms of a cost. So how can we say that they are going to be provided for when we don't know where they're going to be?
So the contribution for the training pitches, that's based on basically the equivalent in terms of square meterage that you lose at Camrose. And then based on the Sport England calculation, that's where the contribution comes in. And Sport England have said that it would either be new facilities or it could be enhancements of existing facilities. The Sports and Infrastructure Officer, they've confirmed that basically through the contributions where we spend them, that will be through a site identified through the local football facilities plan, which also feeds into the updated playing pitch strategy and the LRNA as well. So it would be identified then through, so we would secure the contributions and then through the pitch strategy, playing pitch strategy, and the local football facility plan, that's where it would go. And it could either be a new provision or it could be enhancing an existing facility, and that's been accepted and agreed.
Councillor Brown? You're muted, Mike.
Sorry, Sue suddenly stopped speaking. I didn't know whether she was carrying on. That's all for the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I've I had 3 questions, but I think one's largely been covered by Councillor Bound, which is the replacement of the pitches. First question is, we don't have a housing land supply, which we know that affects our local plan. And we've often been told that our local plan is invalid, but the appeal decisions at Goddard's Farm and on Glebe Close have proved that our local plan isn't entirely invalid, and various sections of it are still valid, providing they don't exceed the provision of the NPPF guidelines. So the question is CN8 valid at the moment, or is it invalidated by a lack of a housing land supply?
CN8 is valid at the moment, and it also almost mirrors what's required in the NPPF funds. I think it's paragraph 97 as well. So it's still a valid policy.
Thank you for that. That's exactly as I read it as well. So I'm really pleased about that. Second question is going back to picking up on Councillor Bound's questions. Is this bit on page 31 regarding the 106? Contribution towards the loss of artificial grass pitches. Now, I don't understand how you contribute towards the loss of something. I understand how you contribute towards provision of it. So I'd like a bit of clarification on that. And I'd like to understand, I'd like a better answer than the one we had previously as to exactly where these grass pitches that are being contributed towards are going to be.
Right, in terms of the loss of the training pitches, it basically equates to the loss of 2,000 square metres. You're losing 2,000 square metres. Therefore, to compensate for that loss, Sport England, through their calculations in terms of how much it would cost to provide that type of square meterage, they come up with a figure. And that's the figure that is the contribution in the Section 106 agreement.
Okay, thank you. I understand that. So there is no definite replacement. Basically, this is it's not a contribution, it's financial compensation for the loss because they're not actually being replaced. So there is a loss of facility there. The third question is, it looks to me like from the answers I've got, we're going to lose 2 training pitches and 1 grass pitch, and we're going to lose 1 out of our 2 stadium facilities in Basingstoke. And I'd like to understand how that is not considered a loss when read against the NPPF guideline of para 97, which says that the loss resulting from the proposed development would be replaced by equivalent provision in terms of quantity. If we're losing 2 training pitches, 1 grass pitch, and 1 stadium out of 2, which is 50%, could you explain how that's not a loss?
You're not losing the training pitches or because you're taking a contribution towards to compensate for their loss. So that's why the contribution's there, and then that is used through, and that's the sport infrastructure officer has identified that through the playing pitch strategy and the football facilities plan, that will either be a new facility or you improve existing ones, and that's been agreed and by Sport England. Equally, in terms of the grass pitch provision, that's calculated in terms of how much it would cost to provide and what is lost. And again, that's based on Sport England's advice and calculations. The Winklebury works, the improvement works at Winklebury will provide the equivalents in terms of the loss of the Camrose ground, and will then be re-provided at the Winklebury ground through the category grade C improvements are there. And again, that's being confirmed by Sport England as acceptable and meeting their requirements as in terms, and also our requirements in terms of our policy as well.
Okay, thank you for your answers, Sue.
Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. I think many of my points have been covered by Councillor Bounds and Councillor Robinson. I think we're all thinking similarly here. There's a couple of things I would ask, though. Over this requirement of category C of expansion up to 3,000, it was mentioned by the applicant's representative there that fundamentally that they have made an assessment that they could do that. I haven't seen that in any way. Have we seen that? Have we made our own independent assessment of whether they could go to 3,000? Has that been done? And if so, what is the position there? And the other thing I'd like to talk about is there's a requirement, of course, for accessibility to this site as well. The current site has got very, very, very good bus service, very, very frequent. Is the Winklebury site equally accessible in terms of numbers of buses and frequencies, please?
The Winklebury improvements have already been approved, and that's not what's before us tonight. Those have been approved and they meet the category C requirements. Sport England consulted with the Football Foundation, and they have equally confirmed that the Winklebury improvements, and that will be in terms of the basically the capacity that it is at the moment, so it will go up to 1,998. There's various other things in terms of clubhouse provision, turnstiles, public address system. Those are all covered in the Winklebury improvements. In terms of whether it could then go up to a category B, that's not before us for consideration tonight. But that would have been, if that was a category, that is a category C grading requirement, that would have been something that Sport England and the FA and Football Foundation would have considered at that stage. And in raising no objections to the Winklebury improvements, that would have been considered at that point in time. The Winklebury site, as I said before, that's already been determined, and that was considered to be accessible. It has the parking and accessibility that was suitable for that location.
Thank you. Could I just sort of come back on that as well, if I may? You mentioned clearly here it's not just about it being a category equivalent ground, it's about it being equivalent, I think, because that's the key issue here. And you mentioned the clubhouse. In fact, one of the objectors mentioned that the clubhouse is going to be much, much smaller and basically they won't have it for as many hours a day. Do you think that's equivalent?
The clubhouse is a new building that's being provided just for the club. It's a separate new building for them in terms of the clubhouse. On category C, the FA grading standards, it doesn't state floor area for the clubhouse. I would point out that Basingstoke Town Football Club were the applicants for the Winklebury improvements. So I would have thought that the clubhouse requirements that have been approved there was something that it was their application that they submitted. But like I say, the grading requirements don't stipulate floor area. The clubhouse that will be provided at the Winklebury site is a totally freestanding separate clubhouse for the football club.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask Sue, I did ask Mr McPhail about the dimensions of the pitch, and it wasn't a rather obscure question. It did have a purpose. If the club moved to Winklebury, if we took that as being something that might happen, and they were managed to be successful through the leagues and then required a category B ground, they would need a minimum size pitch of a minimum of 100 metres by 64. I just wondered what size is the pitch at Winklebury as is now?
That I can't tell you. All I can say is the Winklebury improvements, I would just repeat again, they bring the ground up to category C. And one of the requirements of category C is the increased capacity. That would have all been considered by Sport England and the FA when they raised no objection to that proposal. That's all I can say.
I'm just trying to point out perhaps that we are restricting Basingstoke Town in its aspirations.
All I would reiterate again is policy CN8 states that it's an equivalent facility. And in terms of the term equivalent, it's defined as equal, identical, similar or comparable. That's what I would say. So the improvements at Winklebury achieve that, and that makes it policy compliant.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a matter that the committee will have to consider very carefully, as whether we see that policy being interpreted in that way fully. I totally understand. I'm looking at the Sport England comments, and one of the questions really that raises in my mind, they say here quite clearly that Hampshire FA, who run the Winklebury facilities, cannot meet all of the requests for match slots at the weekend on the 3G pitch as it currently is. And further, that our own studies have identified, even with the existing provision, exactly as the Camrose is now, there is a need for new and enhanced football facilities in Basingstoke beyond the provision of what we currently have. Picking up Councillor Robinson's point, we're losing 2 pitches, artificial pitches, we're losing a grass pitch, we are only being offered money, we're not being offered actually new facilities. Secondly, we are also seeing 2 stadiums go down to 1. And in the context of those comments about overuse of Winklebury, the ability of Winklebury effectively not to meet demand, it can't. That's what Sport England have said. That is their evidence to us this evening. Further, that is a requirement of our own officers, our own policies. Again, would I be right in suggesting that policy CN8 is a key factor we need to consider this evening? I mean, I'm looking at it as Sport England and saying, I don't read it quite as you do, Sue. I'm reading it thinking they've actually qualified quite a lot of their statements in there of this, but that. We need to consider this if that happens. It does seem to be quite carefully worded, is the way I put it.
I mean, all I can do is reiterate again, and I'm quoting from Sport England, so this is to do with the artificial training pitches. But basically, so it's the loss of the pitch is 2,000 square metres, and then through their calculations, they come up with the required contribution. And they do say it's either a new facility or enhancements to an existing facility in Basingstoke. So they're not saying it has to be a whole new separate facility. They are accepting that it can be enhancements to existing. And the same again in terms of the grass pitch, the contribution to that. Again, they're quoted, they to invest in new facilities or enhancing existing facilities. And the way that money will be spent is then through, as I said already before, the local football facilities plan, the playing pitch strategy, and that's been confirmed by the sports infrastructure officer. the Sport England have confirmed that they accept that the improvement works at Winklebury are grade C in terms of meeting an equivalent provision following the loss of the Camrose. And they raised no objection to the proposals, provided that we can secure them through the Section 106 agreement. And that the works to Winklebury, so basically the works, once the Winklebury works have to be implemented, a bond in place, and they have to be completed within a time frame, and that's the 6 months, and they think that's reasonable. In terms of the other contributions, those are just payable upon commencement of development on the site. Sport England has confirmed that so long as we secure those through a Section 106 agreement, then it meets the policy requirements and they raise no objection.
You're on mute, Councillor Harvey.
Sorry. Again, this is why it's caveated. What they say in their document, Chair, in terms of kind of caveating their analysis is, it should be noted that the delivery of AGP at Winklebury is a separate standalone project, is in no way linked to the re-provision of facilities at the Camrose. They go on to say that in the context of the AGP, which is Hampshire FA, who run the Winklebury facilities, cannot meet all of the requests for match slots at the weekend. So clearly those facilities are oversubscribed. And it goes on to say that there is no proposed mitigation for the loss of the actual playing field or grass playing pitch at the Camrose site. So as much as there are comments exactly as Sue says, there are also other comments in their document that we should be paying attention to. There's one other thing I think that's important, Chair, I would ask of Sue and Mike really. At the bottom of their document, it says, we would ideally like the applications to be linked through a tripartite Section 106 agreement between all three applications. Is that what is intended, or will the Section 106s be separate for each of the applications?
Hang on, Sue, please. Mike is there because I've got a question. Councillor Harvey, have you what access documents are you accessing? Are you accessing the officer's report?
I'm accessing the consultation response to the report. Yes, I've got the consultation response from Sport England. I asked for it.
Okay, it's not before the rest of this committee.
Okay.
Okay, Mike Townsend, please.
Yeah, I think just on that first point around the documentation, I mean, effectively the committee reports are all, yeah, as you know, sort of summaries of the consultation responses. The consultation responses themselves are advertised via a link on the report, so there will be those sort of fuller, if you like, consultation responses online that clearly members will sort of delve into. Just picking up on a few points, if I may, Chair. Just answering Councillor Harvey's last question about the sort of tripartite Section 106 approach that Sport England suggested. I think that comment was in particular trying to cover the fact that with these two planning applications, they are also mindful of the, if you like, the third planning application, the Reg 3 Hants application for the road. And I think what they were seeking to achieve in some way was a means by which, even if these two didn't happen, is there a means by which a Section 106 agreement can require re-provision at Winklebury if it's just the road that goes ahead on its own? Now, the reason that can't be done through this process is that that is a separate consenting regime. That is a Hampshire approval. We cannot impose a Section 106 on their application, if you like. So we can't achieve that. But what the Section 106 and the recommendation does seek to achieve is the point that Sue's raised already in terms of the no commencement on Camrose if planning permission was granted for these two redevelopment sites until the works at Winklebury have commenced, and then there's a 6-month window to secure that subject to the bond. But also, and I think this is quite an important point, within the boundary of the sites, the element of the link road that is compatible with these two applications, the Section 106 seeks to effectively covenant that the owner of the site doesn't dedicate the land to implement that part of the link road that's within the red line of these applications. Because you'll appreciate that as planning authority, we only have scope within the red lines of the applications that are before us, not the scope beyond that in terms of the entirety of the link road. So I hope that explains that point on that part. That's great. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. On the just picking up on a couple of the points regarding the Hants FA the Sport England commentary about Hants FA, the wider pitch provision, I think, within the borough, and also the comments that have been raised about contributions or compensation. I think Councillor Robinson sort of described it as in terms of that pitch provision. So first, I think the Sport England commentary around that was on that earlier consultation response they provided, and I think that was taking an approach to say, actually within the borough as a whole, there is an issue in terms of playing pitch provision. So that was their kind of saying. If you look at the consultation responses, it also says that the existing playing pitch strategy is probably getting towards the end of its useful life, effectively, in terms of being a robust evidence base for playing pitches. So effectively, what they have come to is a position whereby they're saying for the two AGPs, so the artificial grass pitches, the training pitches on Camrose, and the grass pitch, they are seeking those contributions as mitigation for their loss. And the mechanism, if you like, for deciding where it is most appropriate to use that, use those monies, either through enhancement of existing facilities or having the flexibility to provide, new, would be through the new playing pitch strategy, which will then feed into the LRNA. The key thing I think with this is that obviously with Section 106 contributions, they would come to the council. So the council at that point is in control of those. So although I recognise the point that what is not before you today is a fully worked up plan of precisely where those pitches would go, nevertheless, mitigation through Section 106 is an entirely familiar, normal planning tool that this committee will have been familiar with all sorts of off-site compensation in the past. And the mechanism to do that and to sort of focus and channel where those funds will be going will be with the council, and would follow the normal processes for release of Section 106 monies. So I hope those two points assist in the committee's deliberations.
But Mike, am I right in saying that the policy CN8 test is equivalence, talks about retention and improvement, it talks about market testing, the idea of a proven evidence of surplus to requirements? You know, the whole section there in 5.75 of our planning framework, as well as what's in the national planning framework itself, describes the notion of how you come to a judgment of losing these facilities or accepting the loss of these facilities. If we are saying as a borough that there is an under provision of pitches and the new work that's being undertaken by our officers, not the old playing pitches policy, but the new framework that's being looked at, also acknowledges there is a shortage of provision, even accounting for the Camrose, even accounting for the pitch and the two artificial pitches, then we would be agreeing to a loss that we didn't know where it was going to come. We may have money, but we are going around our policy, which says, where is the proof, the evidence that this loss is acceptable to us in policy terms? And that's the principal point. Put the money in a sense in one part. The principal point is whether or not that loss of this facility is acceptable to us. And in the context of having a documents being provided to say we have a problem, we can't meet it, and Hampshire FA saying Winkleberry is oversubscribed, then we have to take that into account, don't we? We should do, shouldn't we?
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think the key thing is to focus on the facility. So I think policy CN8 is looking at equivalence in terms of the existing facility. And I think as Sue has described, that assessment of the existing facility, which I know is a point raised by the original speakers as well, has been carried out in that consultation with Sport England as the relevant statutory consultee, who effectively, the key elements of that is to ensure the grade C re-provision, and that is the basis of the approach at Winkleberry, and it's to ensure that there is mitigation for the loss of the two AGPs, the training pitches, and the grass pitch. So they're the two key elements of it. The other element I'd add in terms of the point around usage is that in terms of Hants FA, they are actually required to be a signatory of the 106. So they are, effectively, if planning permission was granted, the delegation is to agree the 106, and Hants FA would need to be part of that. And you'll see in the recommendation that includes effectively securing that usage agreement. And in the report, it sets out the kind of potential hours for use for achieving match day games in terms of the alternate weeks for those, as well as the access to training pitches. So that is the mechanism, if you like, by which that access to Winkelbury would be provided. And I guess ultimately, if Hants FA was saying they were in a position where they simply could not achieve accommodating that additional burden, then they wouldn't be signing up to the 106 in the first instance. So effectively, they are required to be receiving that additional burden, if you like, in terms of the improved facilities at Winkelbury, and of course will have been aware of those original applications for those improvements, including the original changes to the pitch.
Okay. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just have a couple of questions on the reasons for approval on pages 16 and 17. First one, number 7, the proposed development would not result in undue loss of privacy, overlooking, overshadowing, etc. I would have thought personally that was something for, sorry, or let's rephrase that to a question. Is that not something that should be at reserve matters? That's the question. How we can state that right now, because we don't really know what anything's going to look like. And the other clause is number 3, about safe access onto the highway. Now, the confusion I've got, Mike Townsend just touched on the relief road. I know we read it's not in our evaluation tonight, but if it's going to take place, have the highways comments reflected the impact of this development on that road and this road on this development, or is it just a cul-de-sac that we're considering tonight? Thank you.
Right, what you're considering tonight in terms of the access is where it joins the Winchester Road, and then it goes back into the site by about 50 metres. So you're just considering that part of the road, which is the access that's required to service the wholly residential site, and later on when you come to consider the care home, equally it will service that site as well. So that's all that you're considering. It shows indicatively on the plan submitted where the rest of the relief road goes, but within the red line itself, it's just that part of the road that allows access into the site, and then them to then access onto the main road, the Winchester Road. In terms of reason for refusal, number I think it was 7. I mean, in general,
approval.
Sorry, reason for approval. Yeah. Sorry. I mean, yes, that we do say to you, it's in the plans we have are indicative only. Looking at the densities they're proposing, you can take a view in terms of the space around the site, where blocks can be located, and the distances to existing properties, that we don't have a concern in terms of overlooking, overshadowing. But equally, that is the detail that will equally be considered at the reserve matters stage as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bown for the last time, because you've had 3 bites at this.
I will save it to debate, Chair.
Okay, fine. Unless you really want an officer response.
Well, I'm referring to page 41, and that's the noise contamination and air quality. It doesn't seem to me that it's very detailed. I'm appreciative of the fact that this is only an outline application. It talks mainly about the effect of the development on air quality and extra traffic movements. My trouble is with the Winchester Road, and it doesn't seem to give a definitive answer to how the noise attenuation and pollution attenuation is going to be brought about. Any comments, Sue?
With regards to noise attenuation, I mean, on page 41, as you say, if you look towards the bottom there, all of the internal external noise levels and the requirements to control those, that's done through conditions 12 through to 15. And with regards to I think the next one you said was the air quality assessment. Environmental health are happy with the air quality assessment that's been undertaken. bearing in mind its location, and they don't object to the site being suitable for residential units.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue. No more questions to officers. We'll move into debate. Councillor McCormick.
Yeah, I think most of what I wanted to say was has already been asked, but I had two questions. The first one was, has the Camrose been registered as an asset of community value, or has an attempt been made to do that and not succeeded? If so, why? And also, how much Section 106 money are we looking at as part of this application and its twin?
It's a question to you, Sue.
Sorry, I thought we'd finished. I thought you'd gone into
Yeah,
debate.
so did I at the last minute.
Yeah, okay. I'm not. It's not the stadium hasn't been registered as an asset of community value. Why it hasn't been done, I don't know. But it's not an asset of community value. In terms of the total amounts to the Section 106 contributions, I mean, we don't refer to them in detail on the committee reports. So those are all have been agreed and indicated by the various consultees, the amounts that are required.
Anne?
It hasn't been registered as an asset of community value, probably because there hasn't been an application and it's not council owned land, so we wouldn't register it ourselves.
Thank you. Do we have a follow-up, Councillor McCormick?
Well, I think I'm trying to get an understanding of, in terms of what needs to be done to get Basingstoke Community FC to a point where they have equivalency to the Camrose. Are they likely to have the money to do that, given via Section 106, given that in the consultee documents, specifically the Sport England contributions, which I appreciate are not on the papers in front of us tonight, but I would have thought that committee members would have read at least some of these Sport England submissions. The developers have benefited approximately £200,000 already for work that's gone into Winklebury, and there are some very high capital costs associated with a 61 metre by 43 metre football pitch is listed at £395,000 capital cost. So if the Section 106 is insufficient, and if we're being told we don't need to see that, then that to me jeopardises Basingstoke Community FC's ability to implement the improvements that are needed for a Category C ground.
Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just to clarify. So, in terms of the, if you like, the financials of it, there's nothing sort of hidden there. The amounts are in the Sport England consultation responses. Not our normal practice to put them in the committee reports. But in terms of the artificial grass pitch contribution, that is stated as 300,000, and in terms of the grass pitch contribution, that stated as 100,000. That's all on the public file, and I think it's been very clearly set out. In terms of the works, I mean, the actual financials, if you like, as to whether someone has benefited or not, and I appreciate that was a point raised in the Sport England response that you've referenced there, Councillor McCormack. But the key issue is not about the who. The key issue is about, is there the right mechanism to secure the reprovision, and the mechanism is through the Section 106 agreement. So in effect, it's not the money is going to Basingstoke Football Club or any other party who would be potentially occupying using the facility. It's about the applicant who, by proposing to redevelop Camrose, has to be obliged to re-provide at Winklebury, point one. Point two being the contributions, the off-site contributions I just quoted, coming to the council to have the control over, to ensure that they are effectively directed towards the key elements in terms of reprovision on the playing pitches. So I hope that clarifies the point in terms of the sort of, I suppose, the relevance, if you like, or the mechanism through which that would be provided, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, Councillor McCormack. Fine. Thank you. Right. Bring that to a close. I'll start debate. Who'd like to kick off on the debate? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I think everybody knows I'm not a footballer, so hopefully I can look at this really objectively. My concerns are that there's no space at Winklebury to put more pitches in. There's no time at Winklebury to facilitate more games. We've been told it's running at capacity. So if you can't run more games on the pitches that are there, and you can't put more pitches in, where is this provision of these other pitches going to be? Because you can't play football on a contribution. Contribution is great, but you can't play football on a contribution. So these pitches are going to be scattered around the borough at various other things, upgrading other facilities, perhaps providing other new facilities. But to scatter the football club across the borough isn't going to help it. It's not going to do it any good. It loses its heart, it loses its nucleus that way. So I think that that facility will be a detrimental quality. On top of that, we've got an application which gives us no on-site play provision, no on-site open space. So leaving that aside and going back to where I was with the provision of alternative facilities, I think it fails CN8 on just about every part of CN8. It fails on A, B, C, D isn't relevant particularly. It fails on E and F. And yeah, it says that it should be of equal quality and quantity. If the facility is scattered across, replacement facility is scattered across Basingstoke, which is what's going to happen here, because it won't fit on the site at Winklebury, it will not be of quality. So it fails on CN8G. And we've already established that CN8 is valid because it doesn't exceed the NPPF guidelines, paragraph 97. So I just think this fails at every possible hurdle. And on that basis, I move for refusal on the grounds that I've already outlined. Thank you.
Okay, so noted. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Harvey. Now, I've also got Councillor George put down to speak. You'll have a chance to speak in a minute, Councillor Harvey. Councillor George, do you want to contribute to that?
Thank you. Yes, I think I'd like to contribute that. I think looking at CN8, I think it's very, very clear that it's equivalent or better. You should be aiming, it's not equivalent, it's equivalent or better. So it's definitely an upwards one. I think the problem I've had reading and listening to all these things is the fact that we seem to have got fixated on category C. No, we're fixated. We have a facility here which is category C compliant, but it's also a lot more than that as well. It has these additional associated football pitches. It has the clubhouse. It has room to expand in the future. And I think we seem to have got fixated on it's got the replacement facility. All it has to do is meet the minimum of category C. So on that aspect, I'm not happy with the way things have gone, particularly with Sports England consultation, that they seem to be going for the minimum rather than concentrating on something that's equivalent or better. And I think that's the issue I have.
Councillor Bound, very quickly.
Yes, Chair, I agree with everything Councillor Robinson and Councillor George has said, but I'm still going back to this pollution levels. I know it's to do with probably with the later application that could come forward. It doesn't seem to me within the conditions, it doesn't mention anything about nitrous oxide pollution or particulates. I can see lots about noise between on conditions 12 to 16. There's nothing there about pollution, air pollution that I can see. And considering we are supposed to be greening the borough, I think that's a deficit.
Okay, I'm going to move this to a vote very quickly because this is what we have to do with a mover and a seconder to the motion. First of all, though, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just comment on the just on the, because at the moment you've got a motion for refusal in relation to policy CNA, and if I may, Chair, I'll just provide some advice to the committee on
Yes.
that point.
You've also got Anne Greaves waiting in the wings here. How do you want to play it?
Understood. I'll just continue that point. Just in terms of the Councillor Bound's comment, I just referred to page 41 on that point about the air quality assessment, and effectively the concluding part following the consultation with environmental health, that the level of change in annual mean concentrations at all sectors due to development generated traffic is predicted to be imperceptible. So I think that's the reason, in essence, why it hasn't followed through in terms of the conditions they have recommended as the council's experts on those points. Chair, in relation to policy CN8, I think there's just a couple of points to make. Firstly, in relation to the policy itself, it is about the interpretation of equivalent, and that is the issue that the members obviously have to grapple with in terms of, I understand the points that Councillor George has raised, but the policy does not require like-for-like replacement, it requires equivalent. And that is obviously a planning judgment that needs to be expressed. Having expressed that judgment, as the committee have in terms of the, or Councillor Robinson has in terms of the motion, in terms of the planning judgment that the committee needs to come to, it is also necessary to consider the application within the realms of paragraph 11 of the NPPF. This is whether the benefits are significantly and demonstrably outweighed by the adverse impacts. So in effect, the committee would need to come to this point where policy CNA is fine. There's reliance on that. There's no problem with that, but there's still a requirement to balance any of the other benefits of the scheme. So that is, reuse of a brownfield site in a highly sustainable location, adding to the contribution of housing land supply in a situation where we don't have a land supply, and still considering, with the addition of the affordable housing, and still considering that policy conflict with CN8 is significant enough to outweigh those benefits. That is effectively the way in which that reason for refusal would have to be framed, and that is the basis on which the committee would have to be satisfied that there is that level of harm. Chair, the one final thing I'd make in terms of that policy CN8 conflict, clearly I have to provide advice to the council in terms of potential appeal, and in the situation of an appeal, I think it would be very difficult with regards to having a Sport England as a statutory consultee stating their position on it. And I think we'd be in a situation, and this may be the point that Anne was going to be picking up on in terms of seeking to find consultants who would be able to demonstrate that point to the counter of what the statutory consultee is raising.
Anne?
Chair, I wasn't actually going to comment on that point, but it's a good one. Members would have the option of delegating the decision to the planning and development manager whilst he sees whether or not a consultant could be found to substantiate that reason for refusal. The point I was going to make, however, is given the significance of the application before moving to a vote, I think it would be prudent just to check whether any other member wants to make comment.
That's exactly what I've been doing, but thank you, Anne. Appreciate it. Councillor, I'll come back to you, Councillor Harvey, don't worry. Councillor Tomlin, Councillor McCormick after that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously I go along with Councillor Robinson with dissatisfaction perhaps with the like for like and CN8. However, other items that I think we possibly ought to consider, and we talked about the lack of open space, the play provision. We've got an officer's comment, the landscape officer, saying it's potentially overdevelopment of the site on his first look at things, and waiting for reserve matters to make a final judgment. So I think we've got a situation of too many houses, because the parking is going to be a challenge. We listened to the local ward members. They were showing us concern of parking. I know our parking standards are what they are, but we are probably, with that kind of number of dwellings, looking at creating a situation. And for me, also the fact that we have this not for consideration tonight link road. It's completely, in my mind, crazy to be thinking of the impacts of housing on the road or the road on the housing without actually taking this into account. So it would have been so much better, I think, to have seen a full application, which we haven't got. So I think there are a number of factors here where we haven't got enough information to make a sound judgment, and we've got potentially changes to the site, the layout, the road, the network of making it a through road that we know may happen, but we're not allowed to talk about it. It's to me wrong. So those are the sort of overdevelopment of the site, I guess, is the other reason that I would want to consider. So thank you.
Anne?
Chairman, can I just remind you, you've got a proposal on the table from Councillor Robinson, which just referred to one reason for refusal, which is the CN8 equivalence point, and that was seconded by Councillor Harvey. It's not for other members to add to that proposal.
I understand that fully, and I was about to make the same comment to Councillor Tomlin. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Well, that kind of queers my pitch, because I was asking for craving the indulgence of the proposer and seconder. Some of the comments that we've heard tonight from residents and from the ward councillors, while this is not a registered asset of community value, it does indicate that it is a non-designated heritage asset, and as such its removal would be contravening local plan policy EM11. And I think also Councillor Tomlin raises a valid point about the quantum of development on site and some of the other aspects regarding overlooking, which would be not in keeping, would be EM1 and EM10 for the overlooking. But if we have a proposal on the table that's been moved and seconded, I will, through you, Chair, follow that guidance and vote accordingly.
Anne?
I mean, it's up to the proposer whether or not he wants to make any amendment to the proposal, but perhaps if he's considering that, then it would be good to let the planning officer comment on those additional points before doing so.
Councillor Robinson, you're the proposer to this.
Thank you, Chair. I'm more than happy to take on the comments of
you have to state them. Councillor Robinson, it's up to you. You're going to state what your motion is going to consist of.
Okay. I'm struggling to put it into words because I haven't written it down, but Councillor Harvey is desperate to help me. I can see that. I'm more than happy to have some other additional reasons, and I'll take the officer's advice on which ones are suitable. I think if I could make one point that I think is worth noting here. I personally am not opposed to the redevelopment of this piece of ground. I just don't think that this is the right proposal for that redevelopment of this ground. And I'd like to make that point, so that, another planning application which redevelops this ground with all the other issues sorted, proper, replacement of the facilities and the highways issues taken care of and the overdevelopment of site issues taken care of, may well, in my opinion, may well get a different opinion. But yes, I'm happy to go down, to include overdevelopment and highways issues in the refusal motion. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Harvey, you're the seconder to the motion. And before you do, Mike Townsend.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that Councillor Robinson has mentioned overdevelopment and highways issues. Could I just also clarify the point about non-designated heritage assets that Councillor McCormack raised? I just think it's useful in terms of clarity for the meeting. I think the issue about non-designated heritage assets is that effectively that would be in terms of the MPPF definition of heritage assets. I don't think it is that in terms of the local plan policies in the EM11. I think if it's to do with, I suppose, the community value, then I think that falls back under policy CN8, Chair. And I think in particular, the first part of that around retaining and maintaining existing facilities which are valued by the community. And I think that would be the basis on which it would be sort of woven into the reason for refusal already in the original motion by Councillor Robinson. I'll pause at that point, Chair, because I can appreciate Councillor McCormack has his hand up, and it might just be useful to.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. I mentioned that in passing because there's the reference in the papers to taking photographs of the Camrose site for posterity, which of itself indicates it's a heritage asset, and also coupled with the comments that we've received tonight indicate that it is valued. The traditional thing about a heritage asset would be something like the Holy Ghost ruin or Basing House or something, or the bronze fort at Fort Hill or something like that. Clearly, it's not an ancient historical asset, but it's still something that people will miss if it goes.
I'll make a comment myself as being the heritage champion for Basingstoke and Dean. I've got a feeling this site is not included on the local heritage site list. To my knowledge, anyway. I don't know all of them because there's an awful lot on that list, but Sue.
In terms of the reference to condition requiring a photographic record, if you look on page 43, it's just part of the cultural history of the town. That's the only reason that condition was suggested. It's just part of the culture of the town and its history.
Chair, so I suppose I would just maintain that advice that it's more to do with policy CN8. I do understand the point Councillor McCormack's raising, but I think it doesn't fall within non-designated heritage asset and planning terms. It's more about the point around CN8. Chair, I know that there's been reference made to loss of lack of open space as well. It is at the minimum standard, but it is nevertheless above the minimum standard of the local plan. So that, Chair, I don't think is a sustainable reason for refusal that we could take forward. The two that I think have been added to the motion are overdevelopment of the site. You've already obviously read and digested the report in that regard and need to balance that with efficient use of land. The reasons why in terms of the heights of the buildings in and around there, whilst recognising the changing character to the adjoining residential, there are nevertheless buildings of height. There are nevertheless the existing building in terms of the stadium, etc. So I think that's where we as officers have balanced that recommendation. And that would need to be considered in terms of whether the committee had taken that recommendation forward. In terms of just highways issues, Chair, if I've understood that correctly from the amended motion from Councillor Robertson, that was trying to pick up on Councillor Tomlin's point around the compatibility with the highways scheme, which I think Councillor Robinson's acknowledging, which is really helpful. Chair, I understand that point, but again, whilst clearly it is part of the context of this application, there is no certainty, if you like, over delivery of that scheme. And effectively, the only thing before the committee is the access arrangements and proposal insofar as the extent of the red line as is. So again, I think that would be a difficult part to take forward as a reason for refusal, Chair.
Thank you, Mike, for that advice. Councillor Robinson, are you now content?
Yeah, I'm very content. So we've got, as I understand it, we've got the CN8 reason for refusal, and we've got the overdevelopment of site reason for refusal. If that's how I read it at the moment, I'm content with that.
Councillor Harvey, are you content with that amendment of the original motion?
No, thank you, Chair. I'm content with what's been proposed. I mean, the issue I raised and the concern I had around parking and around the fact that the parameter that's being set by this outline application doesn't meet our parking standard because it is below it is a concern. I would go as far as saying a concern at the moment, and whether it's included in a reason for refusal would be important to consider. But it is clear that we are not getting a development with parking of sufficient amount. Secondly, if we are having flatted development built in the blocks, we're having families housed in these blocks. I appreciate what the officer says about the open space, but I just want to register my concern as us having 2/3 of our multifunctional game space being provided off-site yet we are going to see, with this approval given, families living on this site without play provision as well. There's no play provision. That's going to be off-site as well. And I have a problem with families being placed in flatted development without the appropriate amenity that suits their needs. And I have a real issue with that in this outline parameter that we have in front of us. And it is an outline. I totally get what the officers say about it being an outline, but these are the parameters that the applicant has asked us to accept in this application, that they're then obviously going to sell it onto a private developer to bring back. I get that's what the clients, the developer said, that they would look to sell it on. In the context of CN8, I mean, my starting point is taking on board what the ward councillor said. We have, community consultation that was 66-0. There is a clear community value in this asset, clear community value in the asset. We've had that with the public speakers. So that element of CN8, I think, is really important. And it's also, for me, just to put on record, we have a stadium and that's our starting point. We have a stadium with a grass pitch and 2 artificial pitches. That's what we have. That's what we have to decide about losing. And in my mind, that's why policy CN8 is not met, because I don't think the policy tests have been met sufficiently at Winkleberry to satisfy that. And that sentence by Sport England and by Hampshire FA that it must be able to accommodate 3,000, I have seen no evidence that Winkleberry can genuinely accommodate 3,000 people attending a football match at Winkleberry. I see no evidence presented for that at all. So I don't believe it is suitably mitigated. Again, they're not meeting CN8. So those would be the reasons, the concerns I have in supporting Councillor Robertson's motion for rejection, accepting the points that he's accepted in his motion.
Right, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on Councillor Harvey's points, understand what he's saying around the impacts on families, etc. I think the key issue here, though, again, is in terms of local plan requirements for open space. It does allow for those minimum requirements, and it doesn't have any sort of disclaimer around that, parameter around the type of accommodation that is being provided. So whilst I understand the point that's being raised and the concern that's being raised, I don't suggest, Chair, that I can't provide advice that would bring that into a reason for refusal, given that the minimum standards are met and actually fractionally exceeded in this case, with the addition of the financial contribution for offsite as well. So I don't think, Chair, that can be taken forward as a sustainable reason for refusal. In terms of I think the two key elements which are on the table, if you like, in the motion, it is the fact that the committee considered that taking the plan as a whole, the local plan as a whole, and then the NPPF requirements in terms of paragraph 11, and having weighed all of the benefits of the scheme, nevertheless, the concern around the loss of the facility and the contradiction of policy CN8 through picking up on Councillor George's point, I think it's about the potential breakdown of the facility as a single facility, but also in terms of access to that facility. Those are the key reasons for that first reason for refusal. The second is about overdevelopment, where again the same point would apply, where effectively on its own the overdevelopment is seen as such a significant issue that it outweighs the benefits of the scheme under paragraph 11 of the NPPF, and having taken account of all of the planning policies of the local plan as a whole. So that is the two reasons for refusal that would be on the motion. Chair, if that is then the final two reasons for refusal, I would also recommend that there would be the normal absence of a Section 106 agreement, given the requirements beyond just the reprovision that need to be secured should this get to an appeal situation. So that would be 3 reasons for refusal, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. It's been properly, I think is the committee happy with the reasons for refusal? You don't want any more explanation. Been properly moved and seconded for refusal for those 3 reasons. I'm going to do a roll call. And Councillor Court.
Hello, have I got it now?
Yes, you have.
Reluctantly, I'll approve the refusal. I'm not sure how we'll get on with appeal, but That's my
So
decision.
you're for the refusal,
I'll go.
for the recommendation. Councillor Leeks.
For the refusal.
Councillor Robinson.
For the refusal.
Councillor Goodison.
For the refusal.
Councillor George.
For the proposal to refuse.
Councillor Frankham.
Absolutely for the refusal.
Councillor Grant.
For the refusal.
Councillor McCormack.
For the refusal.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Harvey, you seconded it.
For the refusal, for the record.
For. And Councillor Tomlin.
For the refusal.
Bernie.
That's 11 for the recommendation.
Recommendation is approved. Any comments, Sue?
No, sorry.
Over to you.
Sorry, I thought you had something else to say. Thank you, Chair. So the application is refused, in that it's contrary to policy CN8 and the loss of the facility outweighs the benefits, and that is the overdevelopment of the site and the facility and the loss of the facilities. Sorry, and those and that outweighs the benefits of the proposals. Was there a third one in terms of the highways as well?
No, not the highways. It was a mention by Mike. It was to do with the S106.
And lack of section 106.
Lack of S106.
Yeah.
That's 3 reasons for refusal.
Thank you. Move on to item number 2. And I call back Mr. French, Mr. Stoker, Mr. Miller, and Mr. Williams. And if you would hang fire, gentlemen, I will get the officers to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. I just need to share the screen again. Thank you, Chair. This is an outline application for the erection of a 70-bed care home and 6 dwellings with associated access and external works following the demolition of the existing bookmakers and parts of the existing clubhouse. And access is the only matter for consideration. It should also be noted that the access is the same as previously been proposed as part of the residential application. The access also formed part of the link road, which was approved under the Reg 3 county application in July. The proposed access arrangements would take access onto the Winchester Road and would involve minor relocation of the existing bus stop and lay-by. The access would be signalised, allowing a right-hand turn from the site across onto Winchester Road, south and left towards the northwards. There would be no right turn access onto the site from the southern side of the Winchester Road. Illustrative plans have been submitted with the application, indicating that the care home would front partly onto Winchester Road and would be L-shaped, and that there would be a block of 6 flats to the rear. This is indicative only. The care home is shown indicatively as being 3 stories and the flats as 2 stories. The proposal is for approval subject to the completion of a legal agreement securing various elements as outlined on page 62. The update paper, if I can draw your attention to the update, basically there's a change to the recommendation with regards to the affordable housing. Affordable housing would be provided on the site in question, and all other parts of the recommendation on the officer's report would remain. There's also some minor changes to the wording and some of the conditions as listed on the update, and that allows for the demolition and highway works to be excluded. Members are reminded that the Section 106 agreement would still require that no works, including demolition and highway works, would be allowed until the Winkelbury improvement works have been implemented and that those have to be completed within 6 months. I would just repeat again, in terms I did on the first application, that the Section 106 agreement would also secure, basically in terms of policy CN8, improvements at Winkelbury Football Stadium to bring it up to Category C, and that those improvements have to be done within 6 months of them being implemented. Contributions towards 2 artificial training pitches and contributions towards a grass playing provision. And Sport England have confirmed that these are acceptable. Subject to the points on the update paper, the amended conditions, the officer's recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Sue, but I have a question. Before we go any further, you just reiterated the S106 is the same as the previous application, which is now fallen. It has been rejected. Is this now sitting standalone on that same criteria for the S106?
This is sitting standalone, subject to the same criteria, and it would be a separate legal agreement. So it sits on its own.
Thank you. Right, thank you very much. Could gentlemen, in the same way that we arranged this previously, you have a total of 5 minutes on this application for the care home, and you've already enunciated what you've said before. And I'd like to see that, we've taken note of that. Now we're addressing the care home and what you would like to speak now. You do have 5 minutes.
Hello?
Hello, Mr. Stoker.
Oh, sorry, nothing. Okay, sorry, it came up on the screen just quickly. Okay. Yes, you're quite right, Mr. Chairman. A lot's been discussed, and I agree with a great deal of the conclusions. I would want to reiterate that Category C is a red herring. What we have is a facility that needs to be replaced better or equal to or better than the Camrose. Winkelbury is far, far short of that ability. It's oversubscribed. It's not suitable or appropriate for a major non-league football club, which Basingstoke, our club, is. It's a community facility, and it should stay as a community facility, and a brand new stadium should either be provided for Basingstoke Town or the Camrose brought back to the club. Winkelbury is not a replacement for the Camrose. Thank you. I'll be succinct as I have been, so to let other people speak. Thank you.
This is Jack Miller. Yes, just to reiterate on the points that I previously made, I would just like to add that the Camrose has been left in a state of disrepair. The current landowner, while it has been noted that has committed a large amount of money through sponsorship through the years, none of that has been towards the stadium. That's all been done by volunteers and donations, including myself. No work has been done to that to keep it at the level Ground B standard that it was at. I agree that it needs to be looked beyond the Sport England recommendations of the ground grading. Ground grading is not the same as the facilities, that the clubhouse is not included in Sport England.
Do you hear me?
In Sport England's assessment of the sporting facility. So that's another facility that's been lost. And yes, I would again like to reiterate, please take in consideration local plan policy CN8, which does specifically specify that it needs to be better in terms of quality and quantity. And if again, I heard a comment earlier that did say it's all good and well having money for it, but that is not equivalent in quantity. That is funds for something further down the line. Thank you.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes, Mr. French.
Hi, sorry about the problems I had earlier. Yes, I'd just like to further both Mr. Stoker and Mr. Miller's confirmation of what's been going on. This latest proposal is about the removal of the clubhouse to put in a care home. The clubhouse equivalent, which will be at Winklebury, does not come anywhere close to meeting the same requirement of the clubhouse. There was a misstatement by, I believe, Miss Tarvett, who said that the football club agreed the size of the clubhouse. That is incorrect. The statement was made by then the club owned by Mr. Razak, who put in the clubhouse sizing. We have never agreed. The community club have never agreed to that sizing of the clubhouse, and we would still believe it should be larger or at least a two-storey building. Therefore, we would like to reject it on that because it does not meet CN8 as equivalent or better. Also, as it's stated before by certain councillors, this is an iconic stadium. People have been going there for generations, since 1970, 1960. It might not be on some a place for a thing, but people have lived there and have gone there, and it's been part of their life. And I think we should be taking that into consideration. Thank you.
You've got 1 minute left. Okay,
I think it's finished.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. Members, do you have any questions for the speakers? No? Then, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming along and sticking around tonight and for your contributions. Members, questions to officers? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question.
Chair, sorry to interrupt.
I think we have another speaker as well, Mr. McPhail.
Oh, sorry.
Local ward
Here we
member.
go again. Yeah, I do beg your pardon. Mr. McPhail.
Good evening.
Evening.
I seem to be the forgotten man this evening.
Mr. McPhail, please accept my apologies. It's you have 5 minutes, sir.
I won't take 5 minutes. As you can imagine, we're somewhat disappointed. I've obviously no need to repeat the history relevant to the Camrose. One point I would make quite clearly is if the current chairman, Mr. Razak, hadn't been involved and hadn't financed the club 20 years ago, the club wouldn't be in existence today. There's a lot of emotive discussions and talk that's been made in the press. There's a lot of commentary that's been made. The unfortunate thing about the club is that they only sustain their current position because of Mr. Razak. They get 300 or 400 supporters, and they couldn't actually sustain themselves in a brand new stadium in any event because they just haven't got the support to do it. A lot of silent majority of people expressing concerns about the club, but they don't actually go through the gates and actually pay the entry fee. That's the big issue, unfortunately. Anyway, the second planning application covers the western part of the site. It relates to the provision of a 70-bed care home, a separate block of 6 apartments, which may be utilised for key staff accommodation. From our initial research and the demand that's been shown following the planning application, there is a number of operators that would actually take up the facility. There is an extreme shortage of modern care home facilities, not only in Basingstoke, but also throughout the country at this point in time. This is an outline planning application, and as I did say in relation to the previous application, it is purely and simply outlined with access. All other matters are reserved. We had detailed discussions with officers, and we also did a pre-app consultation nearly 2.5 years ago. The application in this instance was lodged in November of last year. The previous application on the residential was lodged in April, and it's taken the council essentially 18 months to determine it. So that's the reason why there was no up-to-date pre-consultation or community involvement, because the application is nearly 2 years old. The development, as I've mentioned, will be subject to a Section 106 agreement. I think, as the planning officer has confirmed, it will stand on its own 2 feet. It replicates all the same obligations as the residential 106. Again, it will not be capable of implementation until the improvement works at Winkelbury have been implemented and is secured by a performance bond. The care home development will also create much needed new local job employment opportunities, both during construction and afterwards. As I said, the Section 106 will cover the improvements to Winkelbury. We will be providing a new clubhouse. I'm in despair to actually the comment was made by one of the opponents that the clubhouse wasn't previously approved by the community club. The application was in the community club's name, so if they didn't actually support it, why did they allow it to go in its name in the first place? Anyway, the clubhouse will be provided as part of this Section 106 obligation, as will the facility to cater for up to 1950. The point, there was a couple of points raised about the club and its current standing. It is currently at grade D. It plays in the Southern League Division 1, Step 4, and the minimum requirement for that is grade D. Grade C is what the club was at prior to being relegated and would cater, the grade C facilities, if they were constructed at Winkelbury, would cater for promotions up to that level in the future. I also mentioned, and when I was questioned about the potential for Winkelbury, it does have the potential to increase up to 3,000 by extending the terracing, as I explained, both on the west, south, north, and also on the east side as well, all of which can be done. We had discussion and great dialogue with Sports England. They've removed their objection. They were obviously satisfied that we were providing equivalent replacement by way of the enhanced works at Winkelbury, plus the 2 ATPs, and of course the additional contribution towards the grass pitch. The 2 ATPs at Camrose are actually beyond their sell-by date. They're not used, they're unable to be used, and ultimately they'll be getting 2 brand new facilities. In addition,
you've got about half a minute, Mr.
In addition, we got the affordable housing, albeit smaller proportion on this particular scheme than previously, and we've also got the highway aspects as well. So irrespective of whatever happened, the 106 is persistent. Again, there are no consultee objections to this planning application. Sports England support it. The officers have made a recommendation to approve, and obviously from our point of view, we'd ask the committee to ratify the officers' recommendation, subject of course to entry into a 106 obligation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. McPhail. Members, questions to the applicant? Nope. Thank you, Mr. McPhail.
Thank you.
Councillor Watts, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Gary. You've got 4 minutes.
Thank you. Same arguments, well, sorry, same debate as the first applicant. We're not building a like-to-like in Winkelbury. At CEP meeting last week, I think it was reported that they're struggling to meet the Category D stadium. They're struggling to get 300 capacity, and this 2,000, this 1,900 figure is an aspiration. It's not a reality. So we're not replacing like for like, and development control should know you might have passed an application for a Category C. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. I mean, development control history is littered with planning applications being passed and they don't get, and it doesn't happen. So it should be no different to the Winkelbury playing fields. Going back to this application, again, there's more emphasis on the housing land supply and the housing land 5-year supply. Has the council actually done an assessment? Do we actually need another care home? I mean, there's an awful lot of care homes going up in the borough, still being developed. I would like to see assessment there. As with the previous application, there's 66 objections to this one, and we're actually consultating on a hotel and a drive-through restaurant. So again, there's been no up-to-date consultation with the residents of what on this care home. So that's a concern, that's a flaw. The parking standards for this care home are against the national average. It should be 0.5, but this proposal is 0.39, again against the standards. And again, there's been no impact on the neighbourhood and communities. I read in the last report there was a noise and environmental study on Winchester Road, but there's been nothing on Mansfield Road. Councillor Regan mentioned there's going to be 500 journeys. I think at peak times there's going to be behind Mansfield Road, there's going to be 1,000 journeys. It's essential that they have a environmental impact assessment there. And we're talking about the replacement of the clubhouse, which is a single-story building. And that's going to be replaced by a 2-story building. That's going to have an impact on the accommodation at Chichester Close. So you're going from a 1-story to a 2-story. That's going to affect privacy. And then again, in the report, it talks about 43 metres away from Mansfield Road. Again, we're talking about 2 to 3-story buildings. Again, there hasn't been an impact assessment again on what all this development is going to have on the impact of residents of Mansfield Road and Western Way and Chichester Close.
You got 1 minute, Gary.
Thank you. Again, we have had no debate on the link road. I know it's not here, but it should be all part of a holistic plan for everybody, where the borough's just giving its land away to Hampshire County Council. And again, that would have a knock-on effect on South Ham. It's going to cause rat running through the Buckland Avenue, Mansfield Road, and all the surrounding roads. So I think the 2 applications are just not fit for purpose, and basically we've let down the football club. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the ward member? Nope. Thanks very much. Thank you, Gary. Councillor Regan. Colin, you've got 4 minutes.
I won't take 4 minutes, Chair. Thank you. I think it's all getting a bit late, and without repeating myself, I stand by what I said before. It applies to the care home, and I support everything that Councillor Watts has just said. So, still my argument is it's an overdevelopment and takes no account of the local facilities, the local residents. The fact they never had a consultation on the care home shows a lack of care by the developers. Actually, I think they just got their eyes on the prize. So, I'd like to restate the argument. I'd like to see the money invested in redeveloping the Camrose ground as a sports facility for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions to the ward member? No, thank you very much, Councillor Regan. Right. Questions to officers? Sue? Sue, do you want to speak?
No, I've put my video on because you're about to ask me some questions.
Yes, Councillor Tomlin's going to ask you some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Just one on parking, please. Obviously, reading in the report, it does say care homes. Everyone's dealt with on its own merit. I just note that it says the average is half a bay per room, so we're talking 35. They're talking about putting 27 in. So my question is, do we know how many members of staff they will require, given that they state this is a high level of care dependency site? Thus, I would think they'd have quite a lot of staff. Do we have any information? Thank you.
I mean, it's only outlined at the moment, so we don't have an idea in terms of the amount of staff, but County Council have based it on an average in terms of care provision within Basingstoke. So that will include high-level care facilities within Basingstoke, so they will have potentially a higher number of staff anyway. So they're saying it's roughly 0.5 spaces per room. This one, as you said, it's 0.39 spaces per room, which they would be providing. But the county have advised, because it's in such a highly accessible location, you can accept a slightly lower provision in terms of the parking for the residential proposals, the flats, that it's meeting our parking standards on those.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Again, Sue, thank you. Looking at the comments of the Parks and Open Space Officer on this one. It says may be acceptable depending upon the mobility and independence of the care home and the provision of the multi green space to meet the needs of the new residents. Tell me in planning terms, how is that going to work out at this stage? Presumably that's something reserved matters stage to try and resolve, but given that there's only so much space and we've got the footprint of the facility set out, how is the needs of the new residents going to be built into the whole planning process?
If I can refer you to page 84 on the agenda there, so it's basically saying because the care provision, the care home would be residents requiring a high level of care, therefore there's not such a requirement for multifunctional green space. And on that basis, the Parks and Open Space Officer has raised no objection to it. So the amount of provision in terms of a flat is acceptable, the proposed flat, and that the Parks and Open Spaces Officer is saying that there isn't that requirement for the residents in the care home, and because of the high level of care that would be given.
Yes, go on.
Can I just add to that? Clearly, I think intent is something, unless we actually condition the fact that it's only going to be, should we say, occupied by people with high levels of care. How can we assume that's going to happen in the future? It's one of these things which is very, very difficult. Is it proposed to put a condition on that only people of that type can actually use their residences?
I mean, there's no condition proposed. That's something that the applicants told us it would be a high level of care. If you considered that was an issue, you could put a condition on that would secure that. I don't know if Mike wanted to come in on that and whether that would be acceptable.
Mike?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to ultimately the use class, which in this instance would be C2. So I think that's the key element here. But just picking up on I suppose the key thrust of Councillor George's question about amenity space. I mean, Sue's answered the question about multifunctional green space. I think the detail of the design and reserve matter stage would deal with any issue of sort of amenity space for the accommodation. I don't think there's anything further I can add to that point, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any more questions, members? Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a concern really about a care home with vulnerable residents in being so close to such a very busy road as Winchester Road, which has over 40,000 vehicle movements a day. I mean, is that really a good idea? What kind of planning policy thresholds has it passed to be considered a valid location there?
Chair, could I come in on
yes, please do.
I think ultimately that would come down to the management of the site. So in terms of again, it goes back to use. So the C2 use would be appropriate. It's a residential nature of use within the settlement boundary. Yes, it is close to a busy road, but ultimately in terms of safety of future occupants of any accommodation facility, ultimately is a matter for the management of the facility.
Yeah. Right. Any more questions to officers? Debate? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the report and looking what's in front of us as an outline application, again, looking at the mitigation that's proposed, I come to the conclusion, looking at the evidence that's in front of us, that the mitigation isn't sufficient. And I would move a recommendation for refusal based upon CN8. And I would suggest that the situation is that I don't believe CN8 is met. And I think in that context, that policy NPP, the paragraph 97 of the NPPF also applies. I think also in the context, I'd like to look at the scale of development proposed, the 70 beds on this particular site. So the scale again of development on this location. And again, if that was the case, that those matters could be carried as a refusal, I would add to it section 106 not being agreed as the office has recommended on the previous application, but this one I think is equally so on this application, as it's completely separate, we have to consider it on its own merits. And I would find those 3 reasons for rejection quite compelling.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'll second the motion for refusal. I think basically, whilst I appreciate it is a standalone planning application, virtually everything that applied to the last application applies to this, with the exception of the overdevelopment of the site. So based on CN8, I second the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McCormack.
Well, most of what I said has been said already. I have concerns in line with the proposer and seconder.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Just on a point of clarification, I may have misheard, and apologies if that's the case, but I understood from Councillor Harvey that 3 reasons for refusal were being put forward. So that was the conflict with policy CN8, overdevelopment, and the lack of section 106, so that it was all 3. And that would be the basis on which a seconder would need to be taken, Chair.
Yes, so yeah, understood. Councillor Robinson, you're bailing out of one of the proposals coming from Councillor Harvey.
I'll go with the proposal with it as proposed by Councillor Harvey.
Fine. So there's 3 elements to the motion for refusal.
Yep. 3 elements as proposed by Councillor Harvey.
Fine. Right, it's been moved and proposed for refusal on those grounds. I'll call the roll. Councillor Court.
For refusal as last time.
Councillor Leeks.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Goodison.
For refusal.
Councillor George.
For refusal.
Councillor Frankham.
I had to leave the room, so I have to abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
For refusal.
Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Harvey. Proposer.
For refusal.
Councillor Tomlin.
For refusal.
Thank you very much, members. Bernie.
I have 10 for the recommendation and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Officers.
Thank you, Chair. That the application was refused for 3 reasons. Firstly, that the proposals are contrary to policy CN8G and the loss of the facilities does not outweigh the benefits. Secondly, the scale of the development is contrary to policy EM1 and EM10. And thirdly, through the lack of the section 106 agreement.
Thank you very much. There's nothing else on the agenda tonight. I'm just checking that. Nope. Thank you very much for your indulgence and your contributions tonight, members. And I will bid you good night and see you on the 7th of October. Thank you.